Hi friends, I'm Caleb, part of the Narrate team. Thanks for listening to the Narrate podcast. This week, Adam wraps up the series Necessary Endings by asking us the question, what kind of goals are you pursuing in life?
I'm guessing there's more than one that's thinking, wow, they just put my whole life in cartoon form. That's all something we can relate to, isn't there? This morning we're going to wrap up a series that we've been in for a while, but I'd like to start by asking you a question. But before I ask the question, let me just kind of get your brain in a certain groove. I'd like you to think of the full scope of biblical history, like all of biblical revelation from the left to the right, whether you know of a few characters or a whole bunch of them. And as you think of the history of the way God has interacted with people and talked to people and worked with people, consider this question. When has God ever asked something of someone and it was easy? Like, think of a time where God said to someone or somebody, I need you to do this, and oh, by the way, it'll be easy. It won't require any risk. It won't require that you step into fear. It won't involve any sacrifice. It won't freak you out a little bit. It doesn't require any adult diapers. Like, none of that is required. Think of a time when God has asked somebody to do something and it was easy. Start with Noah, perhaps. God said to Noah, Noah, I've had it with these people. They're wicked and corrupt. So I need you to build a vessel that can float, and I need you to get a bunch of animals on there, and you and your family get on there, because I'm going to start the human race completely over. But it's going to get rough. It's going to get freaky. There's going to be some water. You're going to be floating around. You've maybe never floated around before. So I just want to give you a sign that I'm with you. No, I'm going to, just to remind you that I am in fact with you through all this, I'm going to send a rainbow. And so when you see that rainbow, that'll assure you that God is in fact, that I am in fact with you. And then there's Abram, a guy who many of us know as Abraham. God said to Abram, I want you to leave what's familiar and go to what's unfamiliar, from this area where you're known to this area where you're not known, because I am going to do something completely new through your family. In fact, Christmas is going to happen because of your family. I'm going to send my son. The redemptive plan of God is going to culminate because of your family. And it'll be freaky, it'll be scary, it'll be hard, it'll involve sacrifice. And in fact, I'm going to give you a sign that I'm with you. Remember that sign? Every male in your family, Abram, is going to be circumcised. It'll be a reminder that God is with them. And don't you wonder if Abram said, but you gave Noah a rainbow. Like, I mean, come on. Could we do a secret handshake or something? I mean, there's got to be something better than that. See, the answer, of course, is never, isn't it? Like, never does God call somebody to do something and it doesn't require sacrifice. It doesn't require embracing fear. It doesn't require to muster up some courage. And this morning, as we finish up this conversation called Necessary Endings, I guess I just want to start by pointing out that to live this stuff out is going to require some courage, some work. And it's the work, really, that I want to talk about this morning. Some of you who have identified relationships that need some boundaries. You've identified some garbage habits that you need to deal with. You've identified some baggage that needs to be left outside to be hauled away. Some of you, maybe you related more on the idea of pruning towards something. And you can recognize that there was this time in your life where you were an on-point, on-mission, focused person, like when you were in college or when you were in your earlier 20s, or when you first started that career, when you first started that business, or when you were a new parent. You were this very focused person. And maybe for you, what Necessary Endings is all about is becoming focused once again. And I guess the point, though, that I want to start with is, let's just remind ourselves that that's hard. And I got to tell you that what we're going to talk about this morning, I think, requires some of the hardest work of anything else we could do. I think as we talk about something, when we hear the word, you won't think hard work. But I think it's among the hardest work. Maybe you've heard the statement that if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. I guess I would like to, with all due respect, I'd like to challenge that statement a little bit this morning. I'd like to suggest that this morning that when you aim at nothing, you'll still hit something very intentionally. The only difference is you'll have surrendered your own right to choose what you're going to hit. That when you don't have established goals, your brain still establishes goals, but they're often dark and subconscious and unstated, and you still muster all the energy in the world to seize them, but you don't often realize it until it's far too late. This morning I want to talk about how we translate necessary endings into actionable steps this week and this month and this year and in the next 10 years. And I think the process of setting goals and realizing goals is some of the hardest work in the whole world. You know, this mid-August, I came to one of these really, really startling realizations. Let me kind of talk about why, and then I'll tell you what the realization was. I had months prior committed to signing up with this organization that provides professional and personal coaching. And I'd spent a lot of energy considering it and a lot of energy budgeting for it. And in fact, finally, in about the middle of August, I started this one-year contract with this organization. Now, I wasn't entirely clear why I was doing it, to be honest with you. There's no void of wise people in my life. I'm incredibly grateful for the counsel. I'm incredibly grateful for the many of you that I get a chance to bounce things off of and email and ask questions to. So it's not born out of this, like, I'm here on an island and I don't have wise people around me. In fact, the opposite would be true. So it wasn't really clear as to why I was doing this. And in fact, in the first meeting that I had with him, my lack of clarity was confirmed. My kind of apprehension was upheld. Because we talked for about an hour and a half, and it was a pleasant conversation, but whatever. And he had assigned me some reading and told me some questions to ask. And then the what I'll call cliche question he gave me as we wrapped up only confirmed my lack of enthusiasm, perhaps. We finished up, and he said, Adam, really all the reading and all the questions and all the work that I'm asking you to do for the next couple weeks, they all really rest on this question. So here's really what I want to get at, Adam. And then he asked this question that I'm almost certain that everyone in this room has heard, and you'll all probably kind of roll your eyes a little bit when you hear it. He said, Adam, if money were no issue, all right, here we go, all right, if money is the conference we've all been to 10,000 times, if money were no issue and fear no threat, what would you do? And I think I kind of rolled my eyes and okay, whatever. And I've heard that a million times. And I blocked out some time over the next couple of weeks to do the reading and answer some of the questions. And it was in one of those blocks of time that I had my terrifying realization. Because as I was working through it, it was this, every once in a while you have those aha moments, And I had this aha moment. And the aha moment, and this is going to sound really arrogant. So, I'm mostly arrogant, but let me try to unpack that after I say it. My aha moment was, I'm living my dream. Like this, getting to do the life that I am living with the people that I get to live it, it's what I've dreamt about since I was in high school. It's what I've channeled my life toward and many others for the last 15, 20 years. Seriously, I am repeatedly saying to people, I am astounded at the quality of people that we get to do this with, that you all. But when we dreamt about this place called Narrate Church, if you'd have told me that the quality and diversity and makeup of this community would be half as incredible as it is, I would have said, I'm in. I'm just astounded and humbled at the different areas of expertise. And it's not this overly churchy place, but this place that authentically is pursuing Jesus. Just amazing. I had this moment on Halloween because I realized that we are getting to matter in these non-superficial, present in the community ways. At the Halloween event, I had this business leader who I'd never met in person but talked to on the phone and even done some stuff with before. She approached me at the Halloween deal downtown that we did, and she said, hey, Adam, are you Adam? Yeah, I'm Adam. And then she introduced herself, and I won't tell you her name. And she said, I knew it. I knew when I saw this event that it was a Narrate event. I just knew it had to be a Narrate event. And so, listen, I just say that to say that so much of this is the dream. The staff, I've loved every staff member we've ever had around here, but I will say unashamedly, I've never enjoyed, and never has the staff been as full. It's just incredible. And so I realized in that moment that what I was terrified of was complacency. And I realized in that moment that I think the reason I'll just say God was pushing me toward this coach was I had to deal with the most terrifying realization of all, and that is, I've got everything I ever wanted. Now, how do I not live a life designed to not lose it? And it began this long process. See, what I've learned since is working really, really hard when you're single, easy. Continuing to work that hard once you're married, that's the work. Being a 20-something who has a career out in front of you and can't wait to get the job and is the hardest worker and working for nothing in the new organization, or that you're the new person in the organization, that's easy. But when you're the boss, when you have the job, that's the work. All the energy required to start a business, piece of cake. Having the same energy 20 years into the business, that's the work. See, what I began to learn and what the coach began to help me through was, on the one hand, he was saying, Adam, this is a great thing because most people are miserable where they're at. But the reality is, see, what I was terrified of was getting to 40 and 50 and 60 years old and realizing we and I worked really hard for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And then we just got complacent. And I'm sure many of you, especially in your 30s, can relate to this, or someone 5 years into a career. What I was terrified of was realizing 5 or 10 years from now that I'd been coasting. And only now am I realizing it. See, what I've learned since is that leaders who crater, they crater from the top. They don't crater on the way, so to speak. Businesses that crater, if they make it through that first year or two, there's a new threat when they hit this level that they've always wanted to hit. I learned something really scary this week. Did you know that when it comes to sexual sin, and in many ways this betrays biology and our own personal experience, did you know that in particular as it relates to men, that if we were just to map out when men make those fateful decisions that wreck marriages and wreck organizations and wreck companies, did you know that men become statistically more likely to make those decisions with age, not less? Doesn't it kind of defy reason? Like 50-something and 60-something men make those decisions far more often than 30 and 40-something men. See, there's this weird question of why is it so difficult to be an on-point, on-mission focused leader? Like, why is it so hard? Why is it so rare to meet somebody who's been leading at a top level for decades? Why is it so hard? And this is where I get at, because, see, I think necessary endings are about staying on point and on mission and channeling toward certain things, pruning toward certain things, willing the one thing. It's about staying focused. The question is, why is that so rare? You know, some of my heroes in this place, if we were to be honest, are for lack of a better word, you grayheads. And I say that with the most deep, reverent respect, that the people that I have the most respect for are the ones who are here and they've been a part of local church perhaps for decades and they don't have kids in the kids ministry. Like, listen, I get the need for that. But those of you that have a vision for local church and it has no personal benefit to your kids, to your family, that you and your wife could be doing anything in the world because your income's better than it's ever been at this point in your life, that you and your husband could be doing anything on a Sunday, and you still find a place for this. See, I want to suggest that's those of you who know what it means to stay on point and on mission. And the question is, why is it so hard? And here's where I love how the text and science collide, because some would say it has everything to do with goals. Did you know that your brain is clinically, it's scientifically, it's chemically wired for goals? That the way God, I'm going to say, has wired your brain is it demands goals. And the moment at which you cease to actively give your brain goals, it doesn't stop needing them. What it does is comes up with them on its own. What it does is it finds goals of its own, and you may not even know that they're there, but it pursues them with all the rigor and all the passion that it would otherwise. Did you know that your brain has to have goals, and if you don't give them to your brain, it finds its own? See, it begins to answer the question, so why is it so rare to continue to produce great work and continue to produce great character? Well, some would say, it's because the moment you stop actively giving your brain goals, your life becomes about something else. All this reminds me of a guy named Bill Walsh. Some of you, when Kate saw the slides this week, she said, I'm so surprised to hear that we're talking about football. Bill Walsh, some of you, probably most of you will recognize, some would say the greatest coach in football history, though all you Packer fans would disagree, but the coaching tree speaks for itself. Bill Walsh, in January of 1989, won his third Super Bowl championship. He coached the San Francisco 49ers for 10 years. Prior to that, the Stanford Cardinal. And at the press conference the day of the Super Bowl, the day he just won, they just barely defeated the Cincinnati Bengals. At that very press conference, he was asked by reporters, was that your last game? Are you done? Are you hanging it up? And he said, I'm annoyed that you're even asking me that question. It's inappropriate that you're even asking me that question. And there was this very terse interaction. Next day, he flew back to San Francisco where they had their celebration. And again, there was a local press conference with the local media. And that one got all the more heated because, again, they were pushing Bill Walsh. Was that your last game? Now, the reality was he had hinted that maybe it was throughout the season. Then on Wednesday, not 72 hours removed from winning the Super Bowl, he arrived at a golf course for a scheduled meeting with the owner of the San Francisco 49ers and informed that owner that he was, in fact, done, that he was retiring. And after briefly trying to talk him out of retiring and offering him gobs more money, reminding him, listen, this isn't the end of a run. We've got a guy named Steve Young who's the backup quarterback. Like, we are just getting started. He said, I won't have any of it. I'm done. They spent the rest of their meeting talking about his successor, who would be a guy named George Seifert, a guy who would go on to lead the San Francisco 49ers to 2 more Super Bowl championships. The next day, Thursday, 4 days removed from the sport's highest possible crown, Bill Walsh held a very anticlimactic press conference and informed the world that he was in fact retiring and that George Seifert would be taking over effective immediately. But from there is where it gets interesting, because history would suggest that from that day forward, Bill Walsh regretted his decision. Did you know that over the course of those next 2 Super Bowls and their dominance through that next almost 10 years of football history, he couldn't get himself to watch a game? He struggled mightily to celebrate their victory. Those were his coaches, his players. He couldn't stand to take it in. Most would suggest that he deeply regretted ever quitting. And some would say, well, then why did he? And this is where it gets interesting as you begin to understand sports psychology, because what they would say is it may very well have had everything to do with goals. Did you know that the day you accomplish a long-held goal is often case, as we would suggest, as we would expect, one of the highest, most jubilant days of your life? Did you know the day after you accomplish that long-awaited goal is often one of the most depressing days of your life? Why? Well, because what they've found as they've studied the brain is that your brain suddenly lacks purpose. And suddenly you had this entire existence defined for you, and now it's like a cell phone driving through Wyoming, and it can't find a signal, and it doesn't even know what it is. You like that? I might have just drove through Wyoming last week. And your brain is searching, and it can't take it. Some would say, in fact, it's not uncommon today to watch a press conference of a coach who's just won the Super Bowl or a player who's just won the World Series, who's on that kind of cusp of retirement. It's not uncommon to hear them or the commentator reference Bill Walsh. Because if nothing else, it's become an ism within sports thinking and psychology, because what they say now is at the very least, give yourself a couple weeks. Why? Because those couple weeks give you time to develop some new goals, to understand that your life still can have purpose, that there is other things that you could accomplish. The Proverbs say it this way in Proverbs 13. I know it's not fair because you guys get to go there so quickly. In 13:12, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. See, even the text says that when we're pursuing goals, we're alive. And it all raises this question, how are you at identifying worthy goals? How are you at translating the necessary endings? How are you at translating the career path? How are you at translating the want, the desired destination to actionable things every day, every week, every month, every year for the next 20 years? Henry Cloud, who is one of my favorite theologians and clinical psychologists, he does something with his kids at the start of every week. At the start of every week, he and the family, they sit down and they develop what he calls stretch goals. Every week he sits down with his girls and he just wants them to identify what's one challenging thing that you're going to engage in this week. Maybe it's getting an A on a test. Maybe it's reading 3 or 4 books. Maybe it's your team winning the game. But what's one challenging thing that you're going to commit yourself to that's not just going to happen as long as you stay alive during the week? It's going to take heightened focus. What's the one thing? And I heard an interview in which he was asked, why do you do that? And he said, it's because I understand how our brains are made. I understand as a clinician who is treating all kinds of addictions and all kinds of dysfunctions and all kinds of misbehaviors, I understand that when we don't learn to actively give our brain goals, it finds them on its own, and the results are often devastating. One researcher simply says it this way. Go ahead, next slide. It turns out that the process of working toward a goal, participating in a valued and challenging activity, is as important to well-being as its attainment. I read another person who simply said, show me a happy person and I'll show you a project. That our brains are designed to have these things. And it all begs the question, how are you? How are you at giving your brain goals? Because see, there's a risk. The person who doesn't have them doesn't lack goals. The person who doesn't actively grab hold of them, we know, what I want to demonstrate is how the text demonstrates this. They develop something called shadow goals. Now, shadow goal is one kind of rudimentary approach at defining it, is because it's somewhat of a new term, is that it's a dark, undisclosed, often subconscious purpose. They're dark, undisclosed, often subconscious purposes for living. See, shadow goals are every bit as much a goal as a regular goal, but we often don't know they're there. And even if we do, we would never sit across the table from our spouse or our best friend and say, oh yeah, my life's really about this. Why? Because they're dark. They're selfish. They're about you. You just scan your own history of living. And you start identifying leaders, both local and national, ones you've known personally and ones you've only read about in history books, the rise and fall of companies and leaders, spiritual or otherwise. And you quickly begin to see this pattern of shadow goals. Some have suggested that you could organize the entire Bible around men and women and men who were offered shadow goals and either said yes to them or said no to them. I mean, just step back and consider Adam and Eve, shadow goal. King Saul, maybe go reread that story. What is Saul's story? His story is one that had this incredible beginning. He, in many ways, arrived, if you will. And then he started saying yes to all kinds of shadow goals. King David, very few have been celebrated more than King David. What is King David's story but one of shadow goals, of saying yes to things and saying no's to things? But maybe the most famous one of all, and the one that I'd like to spend some time on, is a woman named Esther. In the Bible, there's this lesser known, less talked about story, and the book is simply titled Esther. And it is a story of a host of shadow goals. Esther begins, now what you have to know about the context of Esther is at this point, Israel is living in exile. The kingdom of Israel is living in exile. They're under the power and the dominance of a foreign king. That king's name is Xerxes. And King Xerxes has his own shadow mission. King Xerxes, his one desire, the win for him in life, is that he would be understood by others to be in control and powerful. But the thing about King Xerxes is he has almost no inner character. The more you read the book, the more you see that he has no strength of character. He just wants to be perceived in certain ways. So the story of King Xerxes, it begins with a series of parties. The first one is 6 months long. It's reserved for the powerful, important people in the kingdom. Then there's kind of a more everybody type of party. That one's several days long. At that one, the text tells us that everybody at the party had their own personally designed glass. So he's showing off his stuff. And then in Esther chapter 1, verse 10, it says this: on the seventh day, when King Xerxes was high in spirits from wine. So the translation is drunk. Like King Xerxes, he's been having a blast for 7 days partying on wine. He's been showing off all of his possessions and all of his power and helping the kingdom be awed by his magnificence. And then he says to his eunuchs, hey, go get me the queen because I want to show her off now. Now, what do you suppose he wants to show off about the queen? You suppose she's going to write a math problem on the board and have her try to solve it? Put a bench press out there. Look at how much weight my queen wife can lift. Of course not. Listen to verse 11. Bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. So this Queen Vashti, she's been invited, if you will, by these eunuchs to come display herself and her beauty before these guys for the next bit of time. And she says no. Like, parade myself around a bunch of drunk middle-aged men who have had 7 days of Miller time? No, thank you. I'll pass. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. This struck at his shadow mission. And so he makes it a matter of national state. He convenes the Supreme Court to ask the question, okay, what do we do here? And verse 13 says, since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times. They said, how about we create an edict that says Queen Vashti can never come in your presence again? To which she must have went, bummer, since that's why she's in this situation to begin with. She's stripped of her crown, and then he has a problem. He has no queen. And so who does he convene to solve that problem? Well, he gathers together his guardsmen. these young testosterone-laden men and says, how do I get a new queen? They said, we know, let's have a Miss Medes and Persia beauty contest. There's 160 provinces in the empire. Let's have every province send the most beautiful virgin woman to you. That'll form for you a harem. You can ask your mom what that means. And then from the harem, we'll have this further contest and we'll decide who the next queen will be. And so he does just that. One of those women is a woman named Esther. She was an orphaned Jewish girl who had been raised by her uncle Mordecai. And she becomes a part of this contest. In fact, she makes it to the finals. I know it's really hard to imagine a bunch of middle-aged men parading young, beautiful women out in front of themselves. It's just a weird culture. It's hard to understand how anyone would have done this. She becomes a finalist. She then has to go through a full year of beauty treatments in order to get ready for the final competition. She wins the final competition. She won the final competition. She becomes queen. And that's when the story shifts from Esther to Mordecai and a guy named Haman. Because Mordecai, he was a king's official. He had saved at one point the king from an assassination attempt. He would have consulted with the king. And so did a guy named Haman. But Haman hated Mordecai. Haman hated Mordecai because Haman hated Jewish people, because Jewish people wouldn't bow down to the temple, to the kingdom cult gods. And so Haman went to the king, and he offered to the king what one scholar said was greater than the gross domestic product of the entire empire for a year. So those of you like CPA, like you get it. Like he's going to increase the bottom line by more than you'll increase it over the entire year for one thing. All you got to do is let me kill this one people who mostly don't like you and disrespect you anyway. Let me just arrange for them to get taken care of. The king says, of course. Someone's challenging my authority? Of course. And so Mordecai is sentenced along with all his people to death. And Mordecai hears of the decision and he goes to Esther and he said to Esther, Esther, you've got to go before the king. You've got to plead for our lives. You are a Jewish woman too, Esther. And she said, I can't. In fact, to go before the king without a summons was a capital offense. To go before the king and question his use of authority, nobody does that. In fact, she says, and she tells Mordecai something he couldn't have possibly known on his own. She said, the king hasn't summoned me to his chambers for 30 days. Now, we all know what that means. See, the king's not a faithful king. And in fact, there was a season where the king was infatuated with her. That season's long past. But Mordecai still won't take no for an answer. And Mordecai utters these famous, I think, worthy of being memorized words. In chapter 4, Mordecai says to Esther, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Esther, you have not become queen so you could have a giant wardrobe. You have not become queen so you could have this vast collection of jewelry. You have not become queen simply so you can enjoy the title of most beautiful woman in the empire. Esther, frankly, you haven't become queen for any of the reasons the king thinks you've become queen. You have become queen so that you can fight for justice. You've become queen so you can be a part of God's redemptive story, so that you can usher the Christ to the planet. Esther, you have to go before the king and plead for our lives. Esther, you must say no to the shadow mission. Esther, you were on point. Your life was about one thing, and you flipped the script. Suddenly it's not about justice and people and God. It's about beauty and wealth and power and comfort. Esther, say no to your shadow mission. Now, I thought rather than finish the story, for everyone who thinks the Bible's boring, I just thought I'd kind of leave it hanging and invite you to engage the book of Esther this week in your 15 minutes of chair time. But it all begs the question, what happens when we don't actively create goals for ourselves? And the scriptures and even modern psychology would say we know what happens. You form shadow goals, and they're dark, and they're scary, and they're destructive, and oftentimes it's too late to even know that we have them until they're actually doing their damage. You know, there's a proverb that is one of my favorite proverbs in the entire Bible. We did a whole series from it in our first summer together. And Proverbs is so good that I don't even remember the reference. Oh yeah, 22:3. Proverbs 22:3. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. See, I guess at this point in Necessary Endings, what I want to challenge you to consider is that making the observation of the endings that need to happen doesn't make you wise. It doesn't make you prudent. It just makes you observant. It's translating that into real action. It's translating that into real goals. That's what matters. See, we have this way of saying, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. The suggestion is you can be aimless. The scriptures would argue nobody's aimless. Everybody's aiming at something. It's just that sometimes it's entirely subconscious or at least hidden and very, very selfish. In fact, most people are aiming at nothing and hitting it every time. See, the challenge for us, for you, is are you willing to do the work of translating it to a goal, translating it to a series of goals? And many of you, you've been through these classes and you've heard the tools, you've been given the tools, you've heard the ideas, and you just think, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a goal person. I'm not the type that can line them out and then track them. Everyone's a goal person. We're all goal people. That's what the scriptures are suggesting. It's not if you're a goal person. It's what kind of goals do you pursue? Imagine it's 2064. People get up in the morning, it's the middle of the week, and when they normally would be dressing for work, they're putting on their nicest clothes. And even family members aren't talking because there's this kind of somberness to the morning. And that morning, everyone traffics to the same auditorium, and when they walk into the auditorium, they all see the same familiar sight. The front of the auditorium is a box, an expensive one, and your body's in it. In a little while, the music starts. In a little while, people begin to filter in. It's the family, it's the wife, it's the husband, it's the kids, it's the grandparents, it's the parents, it's the nieces and the nephews and close confidants, co-workers. And after some introductory remarks, there's a video that plays. And it's your wife. It's your husband doing her best in the next 4 minutes to capture who you were and what you're about. Followed by that is a very well-known, respected coworker of yours. And she or he stands up and spends a few minutes eulogizing you. And then some pastor or some leader, they get 15 minutes to do justice to your life and at the same time be honest. See, the question is, what are they going to say? Are you going to allow shadow missions to determine what they say? Or are you going to do the hard work? See, ask yourself, when has God ever asked anybody to do something and it was easy? We all agreed the answer is never. A life on point, on mission, consistently focused, not for years, but for decades. It's the exception, not the rule. The reason I have so much reverence for those of you in your 50s and 60s and beyond who are still tracking is because there aren't very many of you. It terrifies me to even notice who the people I started following Jesus with and just how things are going. What are they going to say? Are you going to choose what they say? Are you going to allow your subconscious? Are you going to turn over what they say to the culture, to an addiction, to some bad habit, to some hidden trait? Jesus says, hey, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and everything will fall together. I want to suggest to you this morning that you follow a risen Messiah who empowers you by his Spirit, who says you better be a person with goals, and you better be a person who tracks them with tenacity. What would it look like? What would it look like for you to begin to be that kind of person? This morning, I don't want to pray you out of here. I want to commission you out of here, a benediction. Would you stand? I just want to offer a public commissioning and prayer over you. May you, the people of Narrate Church, be on point, on mission, focused kinds of people. Not flash in the pan types of business leaders and Christ followers, but consistently passionate Christ followers. May you translate who God's calling you to be to goals, actionable, trackable goals. May God bless you and keep you. May he protect you and shine his face upon you that others would see his glory through your presence. He loves you. Have a great week, you guys.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.